Hi everyone, welcome to part 2. Okay, this is from a 1980 tournament in which Kasparov reached this position against the Bosnian Grandmaster Milan Vukic, which, as I said, is a very similar example to our last one, and is another case of the Caro-Kann grip. Kasparov won a fine positional game here, and his first move was also one that Vichy played, with bishop c3, although in this case it was for different reasons, mostly to stop counterplay with rook d2. So now came queen b6, so the queen can come to d6 and penetrate to d3 with some piece pressure. So g4, which is getting the minority attack underway on the king side, which will be decisive later. So queen d6, f3, a6 and a4, ensuring that there's no b5 and counterplay as in the last example. So queen d3 check, king c1, and king c7, which is getting the king closer to the center, which is always a good idea in endgame. Although white now has an edge after queen takes d3, rook takes d3, and rook f1 to defend f3. And after king c6, king c2, which forces the rook to retreat, and rook d7 is a good square. And now a5, which is a very nice move from Kasparov that ensures the long-term prospect of creating an outside passed pawn on the queen side with a later b4 and b5 when the time's right and the king isn't involved in the activity here. So knight e8, which looks passive, but again the knight is tied to defending g7 from the bishop here at c3. So rook e1, as in the last example, preventing f6 and e5 because e6 would be falling. So rook d6, trying to keep everything solid, but the breakthrough isn't far away for white. Here came f4, and white's gaining a big edge here, is bordering on a pawn, and to make matters worse, Vukic now blundered with knight f6, allowing Kasparov an instructive finish. Even with best play, however, black's position was lost. His problem is that he can't disentangle his pieces and bring his king over to the vulnerable king side. For example, if he plays instead here, king d7, now comes g5 and rook c6, not of course king e7 or bishop b4, and white wins. So rook c6, now rook d1 check, and king c7 is forced. If instead king e7, now bishop b4 check, knight d6, and black has great difficulty freeing himself from this pin. So king c7 is better, and now black has a brilliant continuation. If you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Bishop takes g7 is the move, which is a standard combination in this position and a very good example of endgame tactics. The point is that a knight on g7 is unable to stop a pawn on h6. So if knight takes g7, then g takes h6, and white wins. And after bishop takes g7, black is lost no matter what he plays. Even rook takes d4 check won't save the day. So that's a very nice alternative continuation that could have occurred in the game. But Vukic played knight f6. And as I said, this allowed Kasparov a brilliant continuation. Again, if you want to try and spot it, then stop the video now. Bishop takes f6 is the move that he played, and it's a very instructive concept from Kasparov. After g takes f6, he simply played rook d1, and here Vukic resigned. White can now force the trading of rooks, after which the pawn ending is completely winning. Fritz gives an advantage of nearly 5 pawns. A sample continuation goes rook takes d1, king takes d1, and next white will play g5, creating a passed pawn on the queen side that black will have to defend with his king. However, once the king marches over there, comes b4 and b5, creating a second pass pawn on the queen side, and black will be unable to stop both of them. It's the principle of two weaknesses which we looked at earlier in the series in action, and seeing this coming, Lukic had no choice but to throw in the towel. So it's a brilliant example from Kasparov of how to play the position, and these last two examples may well leave you asking why people are still playing the Caro-Kann. And, you know, of course the Caro-Kann grip is not always deadly, or black wouldn't be playing it. Sometimes he does okay, as Kasparov himself proved in the final example of this segment. He reached this position playing the Caro-Kann against Efim Geller at the USSR Championships in 1978. And he had the black pieces here, and at this point he chose to simplify directly to an endgame with c5, and after d takes c5 he played bishop takes e5, a surprising move, ostensibly sacrificing a pawn, because after queen takes e5, queen takes e5, rook takes e5, white is a pawn up, but black has rook d4 here, and the pin that he can now create on the d file allows him to win back the pawn with an equal position. After king c1, which allows the bishop to move, and now comes the rook e d8, and f3, because knight e4 was threatened with devastating effect, forced the win of the exchange. And note here that black has the initiative as compared to our last two examples. So knight d7, rook e1, and now black wins back the pawn with knight takes c5. And bishop c3 is the best that white has, but now comes rook takes d1, rook takes d1 check, and king takes d1, and here black is able to play f6, and this is the difference compared to the last two examples, which, you know, black couldn't play this in the early ones we looked at, and this meant that he was left with a very difficult position to play. And now black is able to march his king over to the king side and create counterplay with the pawn majority he's got here, which is one of the main ideas in the Caro-Kann opening itself, is to get to such an endgame. And presumably Kasparov saw this continuation 10 moves earlier when he set about simplifying to this position. So the game continued, bishop b4, knight d7, king e2, and king d8, and king's going to come to f7 to further secure the king side. And from here white didn't manage to suppress black's counterplay, and after 12 more moves a draw was agreed. In case you're curious, it went as follows. Everything was just kept pretty much completely solid. His pawns on the king side just got locked up, and eventually both players realized that there was no way to break through decisively. Knight g8 to defend, h6, and now b4, and here the draw was agreed between the players. So it's a nice example of one approach black can use when faced with the Caro-Kann grip position. So that's the end of this segment anyway. I hope you found it instructive. Please leave any comments or thoughts. Thanks very much.